Defer to Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Burns, can you tell me exactly how the administration views Russia? I mean, I'd like to think Russia is a friendly rival as opposed to a unfriendly adversary. What is the viewpoint of the administration right now toward Russia?
Well, our relationship with Russia is a complicated one. There are some areas in which, as a practical matter, we've been able to work together. In recent years, Afghanistan is one example. It's been true in some other areas as well. But there are also areas of obvious difference, certainly most obviously and most seriously in Ukraine now, but it's been true in other parts of Russia's neighborhood, Georgia, as was mentioned earlier. And we continue to have serious concerns about human rights abuses within Russia itself. So the honest answer is that our relationship is a mix of areas of obvious difference and in some cases competition, and some areas in which objectively we can work together. But right now I think we're in a very difficult period in our relationship with Russia because of Russian behavior.
In areas, for example, Afghanistan, maybe there's a little bit more of a cooperation there. But then you look at Syria. When we are attempting to work with them as, let's say, partners, do you believe they're always operating with the U.S. in good faith, or are they being duplicitous? I mean, there's maybe good faith in Afghanistan. There's maybe some shared interest, but more duplicity in Syria.
Well, I think on Syria we've been frustrated by large dimensions of Russian behavior and actions. On the chemical weapons issue, we have managed to work together and made at least some progress toward the destruction of Assad's chemical weapons stockpile, which objectively I think is a good thing for Syrians, for the region. But in other areas, we've been frustrated by the reluctance, the unwillingness of the Russian government to push harder on the Assad regime and to recognize what's at stake, not just for Syria, but for the whole region. So in Afghanistan, as you mentioned, Russia has played a role in facilitating through the Northern Distribution Network the provision of supplies to the coalition effort in Afghanistan, which again is, in a hard-nosed way in Russia's interest, because it doesn't have an interest in the spillover of instability from Afghanistan. But
the Washington Post in editorial said the administration was basing its foreign policy on a fantasy. And then they changed that in the printed version. But have the events in the Crimea and Ukraine, is the administration now looking a little more realistically, long term?
Well, Senator, I think, and I've spent a good bit of my own career serving in Russia and working on U.S.-Russian relations, and I've always tried to be realistic about where there are areas of cooperation, trying to take advantage of that, but also to be honest with ourselves about those areas of obvious difference. And so I think over the long haul, we need to be mindful, as I said in my opening remarks, of our own strengths and the strengths of the United States and our partners, and the dilemmas that Russia is going to face over the long term.
I've heard a number of people say that Russia's move in Crimea signals a certain level of weakness on the part of Russia. It looks like a pretty strong move to me. You talked about strengths. What gives Russia the strength to do what it did? Why do they think they can do that with impunity?
Well, I mean, the Russian, given geography and the proximity of Russia to Crimea and the relative strength of the Russian military compared to the Ukrainian military, it's clear to see how Russia could have done.
So military, but also isn't it their oil?
Certainly, the Russian economy is largely dependent on hydrocarbons, on oil and gas.
Is it safe to say that high oil prices, which are sometimes driven higher by chaos, for example, in the Middle East, does that give Russia strength?
Certainly high energy prices have fueled Russian economic growth in recent years, but that growth has tapered off. It's now under 2% in the last couple of years, as I recall. And as I mentioned earlier, if you look at the way in which the global energy market is being transformed by the shale technology revolution, over the long haul, those relative strengths of Russia, I think, are going to diminish. And Russia has not taken advantage of the opportunity in the last decade to diversify its economy.
So, okay, we're getting right to the point I wanted to get to. You mentioned that we need to remain steady, determined, patient, resolute. The chairman said we have to say what we mean and mean what we say. In other words, not only just talk the talk, walk the walk. So is this administration going to start looking at Russia with their eyes wide open, understand the reality of the situation, understand the brute force, the lawlessness, the duplicity of Russia? And are we going to start laying in a ratcheted up level of strategy of increasing the sanctions, increasing the costs if Vladimir Putin continues to do this? Or are we going to de-escalate, provide an off-ramp, and then just kind of hope for the best again? I mean, do we have a well-thought-out, or are we going to develop a well-thought-out strategy, understanding the real reality of the situation now?
Senator, I think we have our eyes wide open about all the realities that you just described. And as I tried to outline in my opening comments, I think we're developing a very careful, systematic strategy for dealing with those realities and promoting American interests and values.
Okay.
Senator
Thank you.
Thank you.